Hello and welcome to the Modern Compliance Podcast, the podcast where we talk about hot topics in the compliance industry and we share stories of other compliance experts who are going through the exact same things as you. So let's see what today's hot topic is. Hello and welcome to today's podcast. In this podcast, I'll be interviewing Nathan Wood about mould inspections, how Awaab's law is going to be changing the industry, and any related technologies. Nathan is the managing director of ventilation solutions company Farmwood. He's also the chairman of the Assessment Review and Impartiality Committee Board at BESCA, which assesses businesses and individuals to confirm their ability to meet industry standards. He's also the deputy chairman of IAQ Group EIA. I know I've skipped through lots of accolades there, Nathan, but welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Thanks, Paul. Cheers. I'm not that comfortable with titles sometimes, but it's almost part of the course when you have to do your intro. So yeah, it's a real blessing to be part of the team here at Farmwood, because my dad actually started the business 23 years ago, and it's only through organic growth and being in the right place and the right time, believing in karma, what goes around comes around, and generally being a good team. So we, through the team here owning it and doing what they do, I'm able to get involved in all associations, more recently the EIA, and develop a bit of a passion for poking the bear and getting things done, you know.
So you'd say you're straight talking?
Yeah, I think you've got to be in this industry. There's a lot of BS out there. There's a lot of people with agendas, and it's just a case for me, just cut through that, get people around the table. What are we here to do? Let's get it going.
Yeah, nice. I like that. Very refreshing attitude. So tell me about your mission, Nathan.
Yeah, this it is a mission. Some people have said it's going to be my legacy. I'm 45 years young now, and I don't think I'm old enough to start thinking about my legacy, but maybe this is it. So yeah, through our work at Farmwood, we was able to do a DIY SOS big build, whereby we installed a whole house ventilation system, domestic ventilation system, and at that time, gosh, this was years ago, there was a real basic Internet of Things air quality monitor. So we could make the air quality monitor talk to the ventilation system. We've become really good friends with the family. They're local. It was a huge success. It improved their health and well-being. And it was almost like a light bulb moment that we'd actually, what we thought we could do as a small SME, put into practice, and the real feedback from the family and their health improvements and what they thought about air quality is like, well, hang on, what we've been doing for the last 10, 15 years isn't just about fixing a silver box on a roof or a fan in the bathroom or anything in between. We're actually having a direct impact on people's health and well-being. So through connecting with different people on LinkedIn, I sort of grew my connections, and a lot of people overseas were talking about indoor air quality. And at that time, it was quite niche in the UK. No regulations really, lots of academic research going on. So it was just a way in which the light bulb went off. I remember coming into the office, I'm quite an animated person anyway, and the tail was wagging the dog, so to speak. And I just said, right, stop what we're doing. We've got to completely change the narrative of what we do. We are the physicians of buildings. And I think it enabled the engineers to think in a different way as well. They knew they weren't just there to service a fan or check out an air handling unit or whatever else. It was more about, okay, so what I've done will actually have a positive impact on that family's health tonight or that building in the coming weeks and years. And then we started tying it into energy and air quality monitoring and smart building tech. And we sort of found ourselves in the right place at the right time as the development and the bubble started to blow, you know?
Yeah, interesting. And I've heard a few people say that when it comes to your health, you know, you're very conscious of the things you put into your body, what you drink, what you eat. But when it comes to air quality, the air you breathe, it's thought of differently, or people don't necessarily take it as seriously. And I can understand why you'd want to change the narrative around that for your business. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. That it's you haven't really got a choice. You know, only really in your own home have you got a choice about the quality of the air that you breathe. But you just take it for granted that you're indoors. You know, the Englishman's home is his castle. You close the doors, draw the blinds, and you're safe. Most of the time, you should be warm, dry, and comfortable. But most people have no idea about the pollutants in their home. More so when you're on public transport, packed train, you're rebreathing other people's air, and it's uncomfortable sitting beside somebody on a train that you don't know, let alone sharing the air that they're breathing out that you think you might be breathing a small percentage back in. So yeah, oversharing is what we do on trains and buses and busy buildings. So just remember that next time you're on a train, look around and think, oh goodness me.
I've never thought about it like that before.
Yeah.
I mean, from a personal perspective, my wife and I are moving into a new home shortly, and it's quite near to a really busy road here in Newcastle. So I've started to learn about things like particulate matter and forever particles and things like this, and I'm now a bit more conscious about what's coming into my home, and maybe I guess ignorance was bliss before
Totally.
I sort of knew all of this stuff.
Totally. I mean, in the early days when we had the basic air quality monitors, I had a lot at home, and I'd get notification on my phone. I'd be ringing up my wife or my boys and saying, "What's going on? What are you doing?" "Oh, we're just hoovering, we're tidying up, or we've done this and we've done that." Right? Okay, well that's creating something, and you sort of scribble it down. And it's only through those early insights that I've really gone down the rabbit hole. And in a way, you are right. Ignorance is bliss, because I don't go into any place now, any hotel, I get a bit of tissue if I haven't got my equipment, checking the ventilation in the bathrooms. That's all over LinkedIn. I don't think I'll get any discount going forward with my bookings if they know it's me coming. But again, we take it for granted. Wherever you go now, and everyone listening, wherever you go next time, whatever building you go in, even on trains, just look up. Look up and you'll see the grills. If the grills are dirty, chances are so is the air that you're breathing. And I think it's 90% of the global population is breathing polluted air.
Right.
So, which is why our buildings, our safe havens, as it's been pitched before, should be, safe. So we need to look into that closely.
It sounds like a great mission and something that would drive anyone in this industry. So let's talk a little bit about Awaab's law. I guess let's go back a step. So I've got a contact over in New Zealand and Australia who has told me sort of anecdotally that the mould industry tends to be quite unregulated, lots of cowboys, I guess because certainly over there there's no standard to bring everything together. And how does the industry in the UK compare, Nathan? That's my sort of understanding of how it is overseas, but what's it like in this country?
Yeah, I think first of all we should address the reasons for Awaab's law, because so many people say, oh, Awaab's law is coming in, it's Awaab's law and it's Awaab's law. The reason we're calling it Awaab's law is because that was the name of the young boy that died as a result of mould and damp in his social housing home. So it's I think Awaab's law is the indoor air quality, I shouldn't call this a version, but I will, of Ella Roberta's case as well. So Ella Roberta was the first person to have air pollution listed as a cause of death by the coroner.
Right.
And that was mainly focused around outdoor air pollution. So I think by bringing those two messages together, I think the government should do a hell of a lot more than what they are doing. Currently, it's a bit disjointed. Maybe we should do another one on Ella's law and outdoor air pollution and concentrate on Awaab's case. So there was a huge amount of maladministration, and that is the right word, around the reasons for young Awaab dying. And it's a bit like COVID times. People see it as a business opportunity, and you said it's a bit like the Wild West out there. There are some fantastic companies out there, some fantastic associations trying to pull together guidance, trying to pull together evidence and get the right people in the room to make sure that the well-meaning cowboys or the well-meaning people out there actually can refer to a standard or can say, we've been on this course, this is our competency, and how they evidence it in terms of their skills, knowledge, experience and behaviours in line with the Building Safety Act. So, I mean, only yesterday I've recorded, all of my social feeds on whatever platform, it's generally ventilation, or air quality related. And there was this young electrician showcasing a day in the life of, and one of the installations that they carried out was a domestic extract fan in someone's bathroom. And it was at the end of it, it was like, great, job done, that's me done for the day. But the installation didn't meet the manufacturer's recommended guidance. It didn't meet approved document F. And the installation of the fan, whilst they had extract from that room, it was actually being forced up against the back of a clay air brick, which is meant for natural ventilation. So all of that moist, lovely air was just being drawn into the behind the plasterboard and the void within that space, and mould would have been like a playground for it. So whilst it's well-meaning, and certainly they have the electrical competence to carry it out, they haven't got the basics of understanding when they take a fan off, there's no ducting connecting this to outside and it's not the right air brick or vent on the outside. Okay, I can fit this, but we need to make a note to come back and actually make some improvements. Or I read the manufacturer's I&M, that bit of paper that everybody just throws away, and it clearly states in there that we should follow these steps in accordance with Part F. They don't even have the correct commissioning equipment as well. So yes, there is an element of people wanting to do good, but the outcomes aren't right. And that's something that a lot of people talk about. What's the outcome here? Is it that you fitted a fan and you can make an invoice? Or is it that you fitted a fan, you can make your invoice and you know that the installation's correct and that the ventilation flow rate's correct and that the person that uses that bathroom now would have a massively reduced risk of mould and damp building up within their home. So it's more about the outcomes around it. But certainly the whole point of Awaab's law is to prevent future deaths. That's what it's there for.
Yeah. So for anyone listening, I've got a little explanation of Awaab's law here. As Nathan said, it's due to the tragic case of a young lad who died in a social housing provider accommodation. And from what I understand, his parents had complained about the mould issue for a long time and it hadn't been addressed. So Awaab's law is a new legislation that requires social housing providers in England to investigate and address serious housing hazards such as damp and mould within strict legally binding timeframes. The law was introduced following the tragic death of 2-year-old Awaab Ishaq in 2020 after prolonged exposure to mould in his social housing home. So I can understand that this would be a massive shift in the industry. Can you tell me, Nathan, what were social housing providers required to do before when it came to things like mould?
They've always had a duty to supply safe, adequate housing. That's never been overlooked. I think it's more the case of people just don't have the time in our experience. We work with a lot of housing associations, a lot of councils, and we have done for many, many years. But more so in the last few years, the needle has swung more towards the social housing works and the volume that's there. And it's through a lack of investment. The government hasn't given them the ability to address it. It's never been a compliance issue really either. You know, your gas, yes. You know, your periodic checks, yes. You know, the ventilation systems in a lot of cases are as old as the building. So you're talking, you know, old housing stock. We've got one of the most aged housing stocks in Europe. So there's a huge amount to do. And I think whilst they've always looked to provide adequate housing, the houses that people are in today have never been designed for over-occupancy. They've never been designed for power showers and drying loads of clothes inside. And the way that we live today is completely different to how we lived 40, 50, 60 years ago. So I think whilst a lot of them have improved their housing stock, you know, they've improved new kitchens, new bathrooms and the work that's gone on, the ventilation always seems to be overlooked in our experience. And when we actually get in, manage to have a look, go over the issues and what we highlight, sometimes it even brings into case fire compartmentation issues, whereby you've got a communal block and there's no fire compartmentation between it. I mean, we was a tiny part of the Grenfell inquiry. We had a project there at the time of the fire. And I think through that, we followed the inspection into it very, very, very closely. And we still lobby to ensure that people take into account their vulnerability around fire safety. But the Building Safety Act's changed that. You know, you've got the golden thread of information, as I mentioned before, SCEB. In order to deem yourself competent, you need to evidence that. Your skills, knowledge, experience and behaviour is the important part. And that's probably the main driver for me is people's behaviour. And when you speak to housing officers and people that are reportable for that building, you know, if there's an issue with that building, they're the person whose name is listed. Say to me, you're going to be in court. If this doesn't get sorted, you're going to be in court. So we looked into ways in which we could try and educate the customer rather than just, we've done the inspection, there's the quotation, you didn't move forward with it, okay. It's very much, if you don't move forward with this, it doesn't have to be with us. You can get any ventilation expert you want in to do it, but you're non-compliant. And because of that, we now need to issue you with a non-compliance or a non-conformance notification, because sending an email isn't good enough. Having a phone call isn't good enough. It's how things are evidenced. And through us doing that and trying to have a good moral backbone, we're actually losing work, because people will be like, I won't say the word, oh, sugar, this company's doing things by the book. We haven't got the time, the budget or the facility to do it. So we'll just sort of park them and we'll move on with somebody else. And then the flip side from that is a lot of these associations have long-term frameworks with the big players. I won't name the companies, but there's big players who are involved, and most people know they are. They're great at what they do. They've got the skills, the competence, everything in place, but they haven't got that specialism in specifics, especially around ventilation. So the example that I gave of the young person changing a fan, she probably works for one of those teams, and they've got scheduler rates in place and everything else. They're gearing up for Awaab's law, because you're going to have a 24-hour emergency call out. You're going to have to do the reporting with so many days. You've got to give the resident feedback within so many days. You may have to move the resident out, depending on certain issues, if based on either their health, the risk of exposure in the home. So it's vital that they upskill their teams or employ specialists that have the competence to go in and address these issues. Because addressing mould and damp in homes isn't easy. It really isn't easy, and for us focused on ventilation, that's our lane. And we've got other specialists that we collaborate in and bring in as and when needed. But I think there's a lot of people that are doing the right thing and looking to mobilise now. And there's a lot of other people that are just waiting to see what happens. And unfortunately, I think it will be the claim culture that will drive change, not necessarily the law.
It's my understanding, and Nathan, so with these kind of issues, they are derived from moisture. So moisture in the air, moisture is the enemy, isn't it, when it comes to sort of mould? So does that mean sort of any issues with leaks or ventilation or anything, that's gonna be the actual catalyst for this type of issue?
Yeah, there's a lot of factors, but it's mainly about dew point. Okay. There's a lot of issues around, and we'll come on to this hopefully later, in terms of the technology and how we can monitor systems and how we can automate processes. But we've been on a new level 3 damp and mould course that was done by a really indentured professor in his own field. And it spoke about historical buildings and the changes that they undertake over the years and what we need to look for. And it covered, roofing, guttering, insulation, ventilation, the different types of mould. And it was the different types of mould that really got our attention. But it's all you can have a tiny contributor from each one of those aspects that will cause the problem. And then any one specialist could go in and go, it's that. And you say, well, that's the obvious, but what else is there? What else is going on behind the scenes? And it's important to highlight that, the vast majority of mould won't even be visible. It can be behind the plasterboard. And there's a lot of businesses. I was at a recent expo, one in Manchester and one in Birmingham. And the amount of mould block stain removal companies that were there promoting products. One of them had this big fluffy dog, so you can guess who they were. And the trouble is, from what we've learnt through this qualification is, any mould growth on porous surfaces needs to be cut out. You can't just mould wash it and paint it. It will come back. Tiles, ceramics and alike, yes, you can clean it from them and the chances are it won't come back. But most homes do have that, the little black marks on the silicone around the bath, and you think that is mould, and yet depending on that type of mould and depending on the health of the person within that space, you need a tiny amount of mould to have such a big impact on your health. So if there has been, let's say, a roof leak, roof tile broke or felt broke or a gutter was overflowing and you get a leak, the superficial, what you can see might look clean, and you have that feeling of it's new, it's healthy, I can smell the paint, the visual mould is gone, we're okay. What's behind that plasterboard? What's growing that we can't see? What's in the air still? Mould can release millions of microspores, mycotoxins into the air. dependent on the ventilation, what air is coming in and what air is going out, they can hang in the air. They can then settle on surfaces. You move in, you create air currents, they get re-elevated into the space. Children are more vulnerable, the elderly are more vulnerable, the poorly are more vulnerable. So it's really turning the spotlight on health and well-being in buildings, and certainly there's no silver bullet to it. We need collaboration with various associations, various skill sets, and environmental assessors, ventilation people, roofing companies, injection moulding companies, insulation companies, all need to work together. But unfortunately, there will be a lot of people looking to monopolise on this and just earn a quick buck.
I spoke to our partner in Australia, and she said that one of the big problems is if someone brings old furniture into a building, like an old, let's say like an old sofa that's been sat in a warehouse or something, or a garage for ages, that's been collecting mold. You can't see it, like you say, it's actually in the sofa. So when you sit on it, the spores fly into the air, and you don't sort of notice any of it.
It's not just mold as well. There was a really interesting case. Somebody bought an old sofa from a reclaim yard or a yard sale or something, put it into their conservatories, the main piece and everything. The husband couldn't go in there because his eyes would just stream and get irritated. And it wasn't mold, it was the volatile organic compounds, the VOCs, off-gassing, because the sofa must have never been exposed to those temperatures. I mean, conservatories can get hot, even in the UK. And that was the reason for it. So there's a lot of research going into the way in which different fabrics, different materials, different building materials, different glues, resins go into a home, because there was another case whereby a young lady couldn't sleep in her bedroom, and the builder came in. It was a new home, major developer, and it turned out that they'd run out of the Dob and Dab mix for the plasterboard to go on the wall, so they was using a foam grab. And it was that foam grab that was then off-gassing or reacting with other surfaces and temperatures that was creating this reaction for this poor lady. So there's so much we need to take into consideration. It's just, we've always done it that way. I will pop out and get that and it will be fine. That sort of culture.
That's wild, Nathan. It just reminds me of all the times in my sort of history and past where I've walked into a room and had a similar reaction. My eyes have flared up or whatever. And I guess you don't know what's happening in that room. That's really interesting. Do you think social housing providers are equipped to carry out these type of inspections in-house? I mean, it sounds like from what you're saying that this is a very specialist subject. I guess this is also a new area for a lot of these housing providers. So are they equipped to do that, or will they need to bring in outside specialists like yourself?
It's probably a mixture, to be fair. There's some really cool people out there that know a hell of a lot more than me, and they own it and they do exactly what they need to do. More often than not, what we're finding is we're sort of doing the arm around the shoulder with our customers and clients. We go out, we do a joint visit with them, and we just share our knowledge, and then they give us information back and we go, we didn't know that either. It's always about that collaboration piece. There's a lot of them that are looking at doing courses, but to get your surveyors on a course, they're not surveying. Have you got the budget for the course? Where is the course? Is it delivered online? And there are some really good courses out there. From my own experience, the people that we're meeting, they're literally saying, we won't cope when this kicks in. We will not cope with this. Currently, we're just about getting by with the complaints that are coming through. I mean, one that we went to, there was a homeowner, someone in a rented accommodation, and they were complaining and putting in a claim for £4,000 for damage to the floor because of a leak from the bathroom. The area that they was complaining about was the entrance door, and the bathroom was on a different side of the building. But yet it caused a complaint. They wrote to an MP to complain about it. The survey happened. So you had a high-level surveyor, you had the tenant liaison officer and ourselves all in this flat, best part of an hour. We have to do photos, investigation, take airflow readings, lots of pictures, speak to the resident, take some pictures of the damp area. And it turns out it's where they was mopping the floor downstairs. It was running off into a corner and it was causing rotting of the timber. So how much is all of that time? I know what our time costs, but it's just, that's the way in which some people think. They did have a leak, but it was resolved months before. They thought it was put through to there. Lots of people are getting their MPs involved, put the pressure on straight away. And that's before this law comes into play. So yes, there are lots and lots and lots of them trying to be proactive, looking to different companies, looking to take good advice. I just wish that more were able to have the time and the team around them in order to do more. You know, we've been with a few assessors, and you know, as men, we don't do emotions, do we? We're blokes, you know. But I've been with 2 other guys where we've left the house and we've all just been in absolute shock and tearing up at the conditions that people have been living in. But that case was genuinely their own overcrowding, the way that they was living. And it's really hard to use that narrative to say, you know, it's the way that you're living that's the problem. You know, you're not putting the fan on, you're turning the fan off, you're not putting the extractor fan on in the kitchen. It's really hard to tell people how to live. In a commercial space, really easy. They come in at 8, they leave at 5, they have a break at this time. We know what rooms they're in. We know when they're in the building because they've got a smart fob. We know what lift they take to get up into that space. And we make sure that we've got the right amount of airflow turning. People's homes, whether that's rented or their own, it's really difficult to explain to people, this is how you should live.
That sounds like a very hard truth to give to people. Yeah, I can imagine. And also difficult for the social housing providers as well. I guess I've read that the repairs and maintenance spending is up 13% year on year, currently 9 billion. Is that going to influence the way that these social housing providers, you know, deal with these kind of issues and the added pressures of, you know, when Awaab's law comes in, it's actually it's enshrined in law now. You know, they have to respond within 24 hours. What you know, what effect is that going to have on these cash-strapped councils? Do you think, Nathan?
There's an easy calculation. A lot of people within our circles, be that air quality, ventilation, health and wellbeing in buildings. There's a calculation that comes back to the savings to the NHS. If we address health inequality in homes, the saving on the NHS is in the billions. So if the government's looking at a return on investment, it's quite easy for us sat here to go, well, hang on a minute, chuck them a few million quid, divide it out amongst everybody else. Let's get things mobilised and moving in properties, and you won't have as many people being sick coming into hospital. You won't have, you know, I think there's more, let me get this right, there's more people, there's more children developing asthma in the UK than being born with it. And that says a lot about the society that we're living in, the places that we visit, the streets that we walk down. And whilst you look at, I was having this conversation earlier this week, one of the main problems around this is that the UK government were taken to court several times and lost, where the judge ruled that the government's air quality law, that the air quality plans were unlawful. And the government basically said, we're not going to do anything until 2030, I think it is, or something like that. There's been all these stages. And each time, I won't name them, they're worth naming, Client Earth went back after them again. But the problem is, in the UK, we use something called the Daily Air Quality Index. So if you brought up a map now and looked at the Daily Air Quality Index of the UK, around 90% of the time, it would show green, as in healthy. The risk is low. Air quality, air pollution is low, therefore it's okay. If you took the UK data, applied that to the World Health Organization data, the majority of the time, it would be what we would, in a RAG rating, red, amber, green, it would be amber or red, certainly pockets of green. However, there's also, in the scale of pollution, it would probably be in the purple range, which is heavily polluted. So all of the time we're moaning about air pollution outside, which 50% of our exposure to outdoor air pollutants happen inside our homes and buildings, the government's not going to do anything about it. The only reason they're doing something about Awaab's law is because there's a visual impact. Mould was there, it's now gone, this room's healthy. So when we talk about ventilation, a lot of what we also talk about is filtration of that air as well. So if we're looking to address air pollution in buildings, we must look at the outdoor air pollution as well. I think I've gone off tangent from your question. Go back to your question again and then I'll finish it off.
Tangent's all good. I like a bit of tangent. Yeah, no, it's all good. It really just sort of bring home though the difference of the limits and the standards there. So myself, just to give you a bit of context, Nathan, I've recently built like an indoor air quality template for our software to allow assessors to go into a building and carry out indoor air quality assessments.
Brilliant.
And that's sort of looking at like CO, CO2, all your volatile compounds, all that sort of stuff. And one of the things we had a nightmare over time trying to figure out is like, what actually are the standards you should be using? Like, should it be the World Health Organization limits? Should it be, there's various other ones. So we sort of like try to get all that together and sort of create a single document or a single standard to sort of manage all of this. The British standard actually brings a lot of it together, but I find that some of that also relies on like occupant surveys, and I don't know how much of that's like really practical. If you're an inspector going into a building, how much can you expect to be able to go and interview certain people and say, is this too loud, or how is the air in this room? Is this too cold? It really does seem a bit impractical from like sort of that sense. But yeah, bit of a nightmare trying to get our head around all of that. Those different limits, and as you say, it's green in one and red in another, it's amber and red in another. It's pretty worrying.
Yeah, and the thing is, I love tech. I've got various bits behind me that you can see there as well, but it's that when you're going into a survey, it's just that snapshot in time. At that moment in time, when you're in that building, this is what you're recording. It's more about what happened in the days and nights leading up to that survey. Does Bob work nights? Or have you been looking after your nephews all week? It's a bit like trying to do an energy survey in a building. You can't just go outside at night, point your thermal imaging camera and get a reading. Oh, that's fine. You need to know the weather conditions, the wind direction, whether it's been raining, and you do need this detailed checklist. But I think data is so valuable, but it's understanding that data and taking into account what can impact it. And certainly through what happened in COVID with air quality monitors being deployed left, right and centre, even basic CO2 monitors in schools, I have a real problem with air quality monitoring completed by companies that are looking to sell a service or a product. Because I know if I came to your studio there and you said, right, we just want to monitor the air quality, I keep getting headaches. I know where to put that air quality monitor to potentially get the worst readings that will then allow me to think, right, now you need an air purifier, we've got to look at the ventilation strategy, right, you need this, you need that. Whereas, if we're being honest, you should take a timed average, you should take a background level, you should have multiple locations of it over a period of time, which is why through the work that we was doing at BESCA, I was lobbying for the teams to bring together an expert group to develop national occupational standards in domestic ventilation, the deployment of air quality monitors, and in heat vent, air conditioning and refrigeration. Expert team was set. We had academics, industry, individuals, and that was headed up by Adam Taylor, who's the indoor air quality chairman at BESCA now. That's all been pushed through. Really happy with how that went. Dropped across and checked out the heat vent, air conditioning and refrigeration one. Sat down to think about the expert team to do the domestic. And unfortunately, the budget had been spent; it had been allocated out. So that's still outstanding. But we do have for consultation a national occupational standard in the deployment of air quality monitors. So that's fantastic. Coming back to the point about British standards as well, there was PAS 3003 that was initially developed by EFT Consult. That was adopted by British standards in record time. That became BS 40102. That's now live on their site. That's more in tune with what you were saying, like indoor environmental quality than just the air. And I do think we need to look at the environmental piece, not just the air. But again, people have got their lane, and I think we should stay in it. I'm not an acoustician. They can come in and do that side of it. That's a whole new world. So yeah, there are lots of really good standards out there. But I think when it comes down to it, it's building regulations, national occupational standards. Do you comply? Do you not comply? There's lots of best practice, but when you're up against it, like we are a lot of the times, where someone's holding up a commissioning certificate for an MVHR, and we know that you can't even test the MVHR because there's not even an air valve in the room where they've got a reading from, and they go, yeah, but we're compliant. That's what we come up against still,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And going back to what you said before, Nathan, like sometimes if you're doing the job correctly, you're actually talking yourself out of some work potentially if you're doing the job properly. Does that also apply to the indoor air quality monitors that you'd put in the building? So you're actually reducing the amount of revisits that you'd actually need to do in that building?
With the data and the insights that you get from the data, really easy. Click a few buttons, you generate a report that looks like you spent 6 hours to generate your letterheads on it automatically, and you've got the data there. It's having the understanding around that data. So sometimes with the properties that we monitor, we see huge spikes, and we're like, what the hell is the sensor thrown a wobbly there? What's going on here? It's quite hard to actually have direct contact with the resident and go, Friday night, 7 o'clock, what on earth was going on? You know, a bit intrusive, right? You may not want to say. But on the odd occasion where we were actually working with housing associations and tenants, they're more than happy to share information. And sometimes they go, I've just lit some candles, let me know what you get, you know? And it's like, oh God, don't like candles. Are they oil-based? Oh my goodness. So the data, if you use it correctly, and I've been speaking to a lot of the big companies that are in most of the social housing councils, is that, right, you've got your data, you've got your dashboard, you've got your algorithm that can work out if there's a mould risk or if they're not quite heating their home properly, whether or not you should actually give them funding to, or a top up. So then you're allowing them to heat their home to a reasonable temperature. But what about if you highlight that, the ventilation, the flow rate within that home isn't right? You could do a text message. They've got this service you can text through to the resident. Is your ventilation system working? Is it on? If you get a response, yes, it's fine and everything else. But why can't that automatically populate a call out? A lot of them say, right, that then goes to a surveyor. They've got to monitor it. They've got to then get somebody booked in to go out there. Why is it that we can't just go, hang on a minute, let's just log into that data, let's dive in there. Or the fan's been running for 6 hours, but it's meant to run 24 hours a day. I think they might be turning it off, there might be a fault there, and automatically have a purchase order sat there for a nominal code with a schedule of rates already set, and they've got a budget of, say, 10 visits a week, what have you, and then the right person can go out there. Doesn't have to be the ventilation guy, the fan guy, or whatever. You could automatically populate that. And there's a real disconnect when you've got really good data dashboards, and then the council that you're working with has got a spreadsheet, and they're manually entering this data into it. It's really easy these days, to automatically lift data, API it from that dashboard into reporting. And I think with Awaab's law, the reporting format that's needed, our own in-house CRM system that all of our reports go on, all of the plannings on and everything else, we can document in line with Awaab's law. This is when we first got contacted. This is how quickly we was asked to respond. Yes, we met the deadline. No, we didn't. These are the reasons why. Yes, we managed to get there. And then there's another aspect that we're looking into now, whereas to procure a old ventilation fan for an MVHR, what's our processes in-house? Can the engineer just click a button on his PDA on site that automatically populates that this is an Awaab's law issue, so we're under a time constraint, therefore we need to procure this fan within so many days? That then goes through to the manufacturer of that fan. Have they got the stock? Is it on the shelf? Have they got to manufacture it? And we're speaking to the ventilation manufacturers associations and them individually. And a lot of the manufacturers that we've spoken to in recent weeks have actually said they've actually increased production of certain fans that they see going into the social housing and rented sector, but they've not seen that increase in sales. So even the manufacturers are going, right, this law's coming in, we're going to need to have these things on the shelf, especially older systems that might not be ERP compliant, energy related products. You can't sell them anymore. So there's going to be a huge sort of drive for basic refurb. But when you're talking about a really small fan, the cost to refurb it, and is it even possible to refurbish it? It could just be bearings. Bearings are very, very cheap, but the process of taking these bits and pieces apart, putting them back together, they've never been designed. They're just run to their life expectancy, out with old, in with new. We've got one site in London at the moment whereby we're having to replace the whole MVHR because the time it takes to strip it apart and replace all of the internal components takes time, which is money. You only get a 12-month warranty on those parts. Whereas if you buy a brand new unit, you get a 7-year warranty, you get a brand new unit, everything's brand new, it's to the latest standards, you recommission it, you set it all up, and away you go. So it's actually cheaper to fit a whole new system and quicker, and you end up with a 7-year guarantee than doing the basics of what can be needed. And it's making that call, actually understanding with the right clients to say, right, there's only a fan gone. The fan in that system is 200 quid. Then you need an engineer for probably 2 hours to go there and do it. Then we've got to recommission the system as well, and we've got to do a commissioning certificate and hand it all over. Or we can literally go and fit a whole new system. And it will be the latest regs. It will be the more compliant system. It will be more energy efficient. It will be quieter. But then it's those stages where we come across historical installation issues. For years, ventilation systems have been put in by anybody. They've got away with it. There's never been a problem. And as the eyes are turning their attention mainly to ventilation, damp and mould, we're going to still uncover a huge amount of problems.
It sounds like, it's going to unveil a lot of skeletons in various closets and what have you. So definitely. That's fascinating, though. It's just the fact that you can actually install a new system, and it's going to be cheaper and better in the long run. And is this also going back to that sort of golden thread you were talking about before? If you know how it was installed, you know how it's. If someone's coming back later to remediate it, you can sort of follow that thread and see that it's been done properly and the remediation works correct. Yeah,
exactly that. And why is it that we haven't got a QR code on the front of all of these units like you do your boiler? Because ventilation has never been seen as a safety critical aspect of the building, and I use that term specifically, safety critical aspect. It's in the Royal Institute of Chart Surveyors and lots of guidance. It's the same for a brick tie. If you don't have a brick tie on your external wall, the chances are, and it has happened, that's why the term come about, safety critical aspect, the wall can collapse. If your ventilation system isn't working, the internal fabric of that building is under undue stress and mould and damp, and is the health. Therefore, it is categorised as a safety critical aspect. However, anybody can go on it. I mean, there are, you can go there and look at fixing it and change it. There are some 2-day ventilation courses, competence courses, but it's not a national occupational standard. It's currently the best we have. There are other organisations bringing out longer term ones, which are being reviewed. But, I'm not being rude. You could go on a 2-day ventilation course, not tomorrow because that's the weekend, Monday, Tuesday. And on Wednesday, you can be designing, installing, certifying and signing off to building control MVHRs. And yet the 2-day course, depending on where you go, won't actually even get you to fit 2 pieces of ducting together. That's where we're at.
Right. I've often thought that I should go on a few of these courses, Nathan, just to to really understand the industries that we tend to serve with our software.
Come and have a day out with our guys. You'll learn a lot more.
Sounds good. So going back to what we said before with the air quality meters that you could fit. And I guess, it's a great way to see if someone's A, got poor air quality, and B, having a party on a Friday at 7:00. But is this also presenting like a reactive versus proactive choice for social housing providers? So, do they wait and see if someone reports an issue to them, or do they get ahead of it and use these kind of monitors to actually be proactive? What's the best approach, or what's the approach that you think people are going to follow?
I think in years to come, air quality monitoring will become as standard as a carbon monoxide sensor being installed or a fire alarm sensor. And there's a lot of those manufacturers that are buying into the indoor air quality market. Again, I think, let's give an example without naming names. There's one manufacturer that will allow an air quality monitor to be mounted on a wall or on a ceiling. And when I was sat in their office and said to them, so how do you know whether it's on a wall or whether it's on a ceiling? I know we don't. So you don't need to know whether the air quality readings you're taking are on a ceiling or on a wall. No. And that's when I brought in the National Occupational Standard that we've been looking at, because where I'm in the office here, our air quality monitor is at breathing height where most of us spend the day, which is sat down. If it's on the ceiling, I'm not breathing the air at that height. So really, what the hell does it matter what's going on up there, so to speak, So again, there's going to be this standard in place eventually that people can adopt, hopefully go on the courses and learn about it and get the qualification in it to understand where they should be. But just through it being in the wrong place, or the archetype, the layout of the flat doesn't allow the best location for it, They could have a drafty front door, and yet when you open the door, the sensor's right in front of you in a tiny little hallway. They might be really busy. So suddenly you're getting an alert to say, "Christ, that house isn't getting above 16 degrees. What the hell's going on?" It's because they've got a busy family life and everyone's in and out, or the door's leaky, or the window at the end of the corridor's left open. So there's a natural draft coming through. But in fact, they're quite comfortable in the home and they haven't got any problems. Is that going to generate a false call that somebody can't heat their property? And then again, if somebody has a shower and when they leave the room, the fan doesn't run on for 15 minutes and clear it, is that moist air going to come out and generate a high relative humidity reading? Christ, it's really high in there. We need to send a surveyor out. Well, actually, no, we just need to make sure that the fan's running on for 15 minutes and then that problem goes away. So it's a real balance. And I think seeing how many are being deployed and how they can crunch those numbers, and they've got really good visuals, how they work out what the risk is, whether it's heating, whether it could be ventilation or a genuine damp or mould leak. It's going to give them huge insights into that data. But I think that if you've got a generic building, let's say a block of flats, and then right next door you've got an identical block of flats with roughly the same occupants, roughly the same comings and going that's going on. If you've got all of the data from one, you can pretty much, digital twin that data to the other building and use that set to model that set and understand, look, these fans that we've never had serviced, actually we've got quite a few breakdowns here. So we might need to look at the budget for the following year. So then we actually upgrade all of those fans. And what's the latest technology out there? Have we got ones that trend with humidity? Do they boost and run on for 15 minutes, or will they continue to run when the relative humidity is high? What happens when we have high humidity? Will we get noise complaints because the fans are boosting and creating nonsense issues? So I think it's pretty much like any sort of, to me, they're not a new technology, but to a lot of residents, they will be a new technology. You also have the fiddle factor. If they've got a screen or a display or something people can poke. I like the apps, but there's a huge amount of people that don't have smartphones that won't actually download anybody else's apps, third-party stuff onto them as well. But in terms of housing associations and councils saying, well, actually, we have been managing this problem. We have got the data on it. Here's the data set. This relates to our specialist contractor, our tier one. This is the form that we've got in there. When the housing ombudsman potentially looked into them for a maladministration case, which they portray openly and honestly out there, they name and shame. To be fair, they also do name really good turnarounds and people doing good. It's just showcasing that, yes, we're using a competent subcontractor via our tier one because they don't have the specialist knowledge, experience to actually carry out this work. Here's the data set that we had, and Mrs. Smith down the road, turns out she was actually turning off her fan at night. So yes, she has got damp and mould. We identified it. We explained to her in a resident liaison meeting or a one-to-one in her home how that's best managed. And since then, we've had a positive outcome. So I think data is an important set point in part of the communication piece.
Yes, it sounds like it's important. It's a useful tool to have, but it's only as good as the person who can actually read it and interpret those results.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
For what you've said there's tons of factors. I know my brother-in-law likes to have a very long shower. That would certainly come up on the readings, and people probably think, oh, what's going on here? There's a lot of moisture in this room. Yeah, interesting. So the idea of twinning two buildings is really interesting too. So you could say like, okay, we almost like, I guess, like taking an external reading for indoor air quality just to kind of like benchmark it against. I can understand that that's useful to have not just the one building in isolation, but a second building that you could kind of compare it to.
Yeah. It's you can use it as well if we're looking at outdoor air quality. So certain locations where it's been reported that there is high levels of air pollution, they're referred to as air quality management areas, and councils will have a legal obligation to report to DEFRA what's going on in that area, what the management plan is, how they're managing to try and reduce the air pollution in those areas. And they will have a £80,000 air quality monitoring station somewhere on that site that the data is collected from and dilution tubes are changed. We've got one right near our office, and quite often I drive past it and check how big they've let the bush grow in front of it, and I'm thinking, yeah, the results are going to be good because that bush is growing again. Just get rid of the bush. Maybe we should remove the bush, not get rid of it. So we monitor that data quite a bit, and it's really, really high. And again, if I take that data, I've done this on a webinar the other day, I took the data, related the raw data to the WHO standards, and the readings were even worse. And I know that there's an elder care facility at the end of the road, a nursery, and a bank of terrace houses all down one side of it. No one knows about it, you know. But if you take that data and you go, okay, so let's look at the traffic count, let's look at the businesses in the area and the street furniture and the building type, and you fed that into AI and said, research other roads with similar count and buildings in this area, and who else is likely to be at risk to becoming an air quality management area, it could do it. You know, it could easily do it. You don't need another deforestation. £80,000 of public money spent on it, and somebody going out and maintaining it and changing dilution tubes that children have nicked and thought it's funny to smash in the street. You know, I mean, that does happen. I'm not saying all kids are like that.
Oh my God.
But it's a way in which if you've got these data sets, how can we digitize and actually make value of that for other places that don't necessarily have the budget to do that? So yeah, I think there's a huge amount that we can do with data sets, but then there's a whole new podcast on who owns the data, what rights do you have to that data, and who does what with it. But yeah, we'll park that one.
Yeah. So you think there's an opportunity for housing providers to cut costs by with advances in AI technology and things? I mean, I've heard through one of our clients that that they get AI to actually scan their reports and look for any inconsistencies and like sort of where maybe there's an issue, it's not matching against the standard sort of thing. So let's talk a little bit, Nathan, about emerging and future technology. I know that when an industry goes through a big shakeup, like obviously the mould inspection industry is going to go through with the Awaab's law, the demand for compliance services increases. There are often advances also in related technologies like inspection and analysis. Are any exciting new technologies emerging in the mould and IAQ industries that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, there's a lot. So you've got collaboration and partnerships with fan manufacturers and the indoor air quality monitoring companies now, whereby the air quality monitor can talk or control the fan, know when it's running, how many running hours it's had, maybe even boost it. That's really cool. That's a standard thing. Again, I said at the beginning, we done that at the DIY SOS, big build, and seeing that come through with my manufacturers now, it's like, what took you so long, boys? You know, but yeah, that's really cool to see. And there's a few of them doing it. I do think that needs to be completely open source though. Why do we need, so if we went out to a specific council that's got a specific IoT monitor, indoor air quality monitor on the wall, why can't we have an open source IoT integration bit of kit that can talk to any fan? I understand that there's marketing and people want to sell their products, but I think it should be open source and open to all systems and upgrades and retrofits. With mould and mould sampling and mould testing, I put this on my LinkedIn recently. I said about that we shouldn't keep calling black mould, because there's so many different types that all look like black mould, but can have massively varying different effects on our health. One of the mould types, I'm not going to say it, I'm rubbish with the name of it. Its known impact is that it makes immature lungs bleed, and so there's these known impacts. So when people go in and go, oh yeah, there's black mould, it should be there's black mould. Okay, how quickly can we remedy it? What's the problem? Because one of the arguments was, why do you need to know what it is? Just get rid of it. And I'm like, yeah, we do need to get rid of it, but at the same time, should we not test it, see what it is, and go, actually, you know, young Tommy who's 2 with asthma, we probably need to get him checked out and do some blood work to see if he's got any impacts on it. And that, there's a lot of cases currently ongoing I can't talk about, whereby blood work's been done on people exposed to mould in their homes, and it's been found in the report that comes back. So mould testing historically has been really, really expensive. We've got an air sampler with a Petri dish, and you have to do it under certain conditions to follow a certain standard. And we can either grow the cultures here, and then you do the colony morphology. We can only do a count and try and refer what we see to library pictures, or we send it off to a lab. They grow it in the lab, and then they analyse and tell you each different mould type. That costs hundreds, if not thousands of pounds. The tester that we've got is about $3,000. You know, the Petri dishes, if you don't use them and store them in a certain way, they expire really quickly. Whereas the advances with AI now, we've partnered with a company through Ian, who you've interviewed previously, and we've got a way now in which we can do a high quality air sample and a swab sample. We can send it off to a lab in the UK. They feed it through an AI machine, because a mould spore under a microscope is a mould spore. That doesn't change, so it's quite easy to distinguish what it is. And they analyse for every single type of mould. They can tell you whether there's human skin, pet skin, what general particulates are in there and everything else. But it's important that you do a background test as well, because if we done the test on a lovely warm summer's day, the result inside would be completely different if we done the test on a wet, windy day or in autumn. So you do a background level to get that indication and then an internal one. But the good thing is where it's AI and it's not a human in a lab that works 9 to 5, you get the report back within 24 to 48 hours. And for us, being able to do that, right, okay, we've done the mould test before, we've now fixed the ventilation system, let's go back and then do another one. You can see a proof in efficacy for what you've done. So whilst certainly, yes, let's just get rid of the mould. Let's sort that out. Sometimes the process will mean that people are still living within that environment and the spores could still be hanging. So really, I'm not saying that the mould is safe. There's some moulds that aren't as harmful to your health. I use the analogy, it's a bit like mushrooms. Some mushrooms you can eat, some mushrooms will get you high, some mushrooms will kill you. It's pretty much the same with mould. Some mould is, doesn't look great, might be a bit harmful to you. Others are really bad for you. So shouldn't we take that into consideration? So yeah, technology is coming through. It's just important that we have good British standards, or we adopt European or American or Australian standards. So then we actually apply that. So then there's a benchmark for everybody to carry out these works. And yes, the test equipment should be UCAS calibrated, but then all of the price goes up. And at the moment, it's quite affordable to do these tests. And we're not selling them to make a huge markup, because we're just trying to do, right, this is what it was before, this is what's been remedied, and there's your proof of a reduction. But it's actually having an understanding of what is a safe limit. We don't actually have that for indoor air quality currently. We have thresholds. I mean, there's no safe exposure to children, for children. And certainly we need to take into consideration the health impacts of mould on the young, the elderly, or the infirm, and how that calculates into meaningful health outcomes following remediation.
Yeah. So there's clearly nuances to this. My sister's always saying it's not a seagull. There's no such thing as a seagull. There's different types of gulls that have their own special names. So I guess it's the same with mould. Not all mould is black mould. And I've heard as well that the health effects can range from chronic fatigue syndrome all the way through to asthma, and then they actually think there might be a link. Well, I've heard that there could be a link between multiple sclerosis and mold as well. They haven't proven it yet, I don't think, but it's they're looking into that. And MS, for example, it's more prevalent in the northern areas, like the north of England. So that would suggest maybe the colder, damper areas, kind of where there's more likely to be some mold, which I think is quite fascinating. So yeah, those changes in AI lab analysis sound like they're going to make it a more viable kind of option to actually investigate these different types of mold, and I guess also the health impacts on little Jimmy or whoever it is who's living in that room. If you could wave a magic wand, Nathan, what technological advances would you like to see in the mold inspection industry?
I think not just technological advances, but I think standards. We need the standards first and foremost, and then technology and testing and everything can align to those standards. I think we just need really good test equipment that's affordable. I mean, the amount of money we invest in our ventilation, we've got a £2,500 powered disc airflow meter, so we can test every fan extremely accuracy. The traditional rotating vane anemometers, because sometimes you're talking about such low airflows, the actual resistance on it, even though it's meant to be calculated, can drift. This is like ultra sensitive and accurate. It's $2,500. If you're taking that to site, you've got to charge for that. And I think, you can get your probe testers for damp and moisture on walls. You can go to your online next day delivery service and get one pretty quick, and it looks the part. It might work well for the first few months, but will it have the longevity that the more expensive equipment has? How soon do you have to send it off and have it calibrated? Is there a calibration for it? Or is it just always in your toolbox and you use it? So I think reliability, the specification of equipment should be included in the regulations. Normally it's the standard, it has to be UCAS calibrated and everything else. But I think if we're looking to get a new field of experts or people that would be deemed competent to address damp and mould, they need the affordable tools to enable them to carry out their job competently.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think as well, that tends to sort of happen naturally, doesn't it, when an industry grows or progresses. Like, for example, I know that mould lab samples in New Zealand and Australia are prohibitively expensive. Whereas as an industry grows, there's sort of economies of scale, aren't there? And the costs come down. I mean, I guess in your line of work, you've got your FLIR thermal imaging cameras and things like this, which I guess a lot of them are very expensive bits of kit. You don't want to sort of chuck it in the back of your car or whatever. So,
but even they've come down a lot in price. They've come down a huge amount in price. I mean, you've even got the ones that can click into the bottom of your smartphone now for like 300 quid. The FLIR ones.
Oh, cool.
So it's that demand from them. But let's just touch on that. We went on a thermal imaging course at BESCA. And they touched on quantum physics and really went really deep on it to give us a basic qualification in it. And then when we turned up on site with a surveyor who's got all of these qualifications and letters after his name, he was literally picking it up going, oh, this is cool, and like putting it in his leg and stuff. And he'd never even had the basic training around thermal imaging, So again, it's one of those things where you need that competence and compliance and that level of understanding to carry out the job properly.
Yeah. So thanks so much for your time today, Nathan. I really appreciate it. I've learned so much about Awaab's law, the advances of technology that are potentially coming in this industry, the mould industry, and also, a lot of the actual, regulatory changes and things you'd like to sort of see and things that are happening in the industry. So thanks so much for your time, Nathan. Really do appreciate it.
Very welcome.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed this content. I hope you got something out of it. If you know anyone else who is affected by this topic, please forward this on to them. If you've got a hot topic you'd like to discuss, please get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. Let's keep this conversation going, and we'll see you next time.